Hello, and welcome to Love Your Liver, a podcast where we talk about all things liver and give our livers just a little bit of extra love. I'm Gina Vigliotti Madison, aka Maya Valentine, and I could not be more excited to have Dr. Michael Goran with us here today on International NASH Day for a special episode centered all around sugar and talking about his book, Sugarproof. Dr. Michael Goran is one of the world's most widely recognized experts in childhood nutrition and obesity research. He has more than 30 years of experience as a researcher, mentor, and educator. He is a professor of pediatrics at the University of Southern California, Keck School of Medicine. He is co-director of the USC Diabetes and Obesity Research Institute, and he leads the program in diabetes and obesity at Children's Hospital, Los Angeles. Dr. Goran has done quite a bit of research on the effects of sugar on kids' present and future health. And he's found that too much sugar does not just cause childhood obesity, but it can cause health issues in kids who are not overweight, including fatty liver disease, prediabetes, and elevated risk for eventual heart disease. So Dr. Goran, welcome to our podcast today.
Hi, Gina. Thanks so much. Lovely to be here on International NASH Day.
Yes, we're really pleased to have you here. So maybe just to start off, give us a little bit about your history, kind of what got you, interested in this field, some of the research you've done, and what's kind of led you on this path that you've been on.
Yeah, it's, I've been doing this for over 30 years. When I started off doing this 30 years ago, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease wasn't even a disease in children or adults for that matter. So I was interested originally in understanding how the body uses nutrition to grow and thrive. And I was interested in children because children are growing and thriving, and how the body adapts to extreme conditions. When I started that research, nobody was even really too worried about childhood obesity or weight control or liver disease or diabetes in children. And so it started off, this was in a long time ago. Then obesity started to be more of a problem in children, and we started looking at how nutrition affects weight regulation in kids and how the body decides to store extra calories in body fat. We got interested in visceral fat, which is wrapping of fat around the organs. And, then diabetes in children became a problem, so we started looking at that. And then fatty liver disease became a problem in children, and we were collecting a lot of data on that. At first, we weren't even really looking at dietary factors became to be of major interest to us. And then when we looked more deeply at diet, it was always dietary sugar that was related to all these outcomes: weight gain, diabetes, fatty liver. And so it became a common denominator of all these problems. And coupled with that, we're seeing massive increases in sugar in the food environment, different types of sugar that we can talk about. And so I followed the path of the data. I'm very data oriented, and the findings kept pointing to sugar, and the findings kept pointing to these other complications, not just weight gain, but other things you might not even think about, like the liver, which is an organ we take for granted, but it's a giant workhorse of an organ in the body that's very important. So I followed the data, and the data pointed to sugar, and the research was pretty clear, but I had to tell the story. And that's where Sugarproof came in, and not just tell the story, but we wanted to come up with solutions that families everywhere could adopt. Simple solutions to not eradicate sugar, but to reduce and right-size sugar so that we can avoid those problems.
So I'm a parent myself. I have two children, and my youngest son, he's 7 years old. And we recently got him some blood work done because we thought he may have prediabetes. We're fortunate he does not yet have prediabetes, but he does have high triglycerides. And I believe that he has a sugar addiction, and I am working to fix that. And your book, Sugarproof, has really been helpful for us. In fact, a video that we're showing today as well, my family and I got together and we were cooking the fried rice recipe out of your book. And my son had a really good time doing that. And he continues to want to cook now all the time, which I think is great. And I know that's one of the things that you talk about in your book is kind of coming together as a family, getting children involved in the cooking process. But even before I get to that, one of the things that was really shocking to me that I did not know about that you talked about in your book was that even families who believe they're doing the right thing for their children, who maybe have a healthier lifestyle and are trying to, make sure their children are eating healthy, just aren't aware of some of, what is actually in the food because, food labels may disguise it, or, maybe they're not reading them as closely. So maybe you can talk even a little bit about that as well, and maybe even share some suggestions or tips that you have for families who are, really trying to be healthy and maybe not even aware that they're making unhealthy choices.
Yeah. So, as families, as parents, as caregivers, I have 2 teenage kids, although sadly, one's not a kid anymore. She's 18. So she told me she can adopt her own child if she wanted to. But, we've lived through all these issues, and we have to be detectives, and we can't take it for granted that packaged food, even if it is specifically targeted for children, we can't take it for granted that it's healthy. I think we've assumed for too long, and that's not always the case. And so we're responsible for what we put in our kids' mouths and what it actually is. That sugar can be hidden. So hidden sugars are a big issue. You might not even be aware of those hidden sugars in things like pasta sauce, ketchup, crackers, nut butters, salad dressing, frozen pizzas, and the list goes on and on and on. So over 70% of processed foods and 80% of foods targeted to children have some type of added sugar, and there could be 200 names for added sugar. So food companies have gotten pretty smart at disguising those and making labels sound good when really there's a lot of sugar or sweeteners in there that we can also talk about. So, in terms of strategies, an easy one is if there's a common food item in your pantry that you depend on a lot. And so for kids, that could be nut butter, ketchup, pasta sauce. Take a look at those, even packaged bread or energy bars, because there's lots of really great healthy alternatives out there that you don't have to have sugar in peanut butter. The best peanut butter is just ground peanuts. That's all you need. Just beware of those hidden sugars, number one. Number two, the usual culprits are very problematic are liquid sugar. And liquid sugar is not just soda, but juice, energy drinks, packaged smoothies. Look out for those because we can talk about this in more detail, but it's liquid sugar that causes a lot of problems. And then there's this simple tips and hacks that we have in the book about little adjustments you can make because we're not asking people to give up sugar altogether. If you make pancakes at the weekend, you can make the batter with extra fiber or extra protein because that will offset the glucose response. And there's no rule that you have to have maple syrup with pancakes. You can serve pancakes with lots of other delicious things, maybe a little bit of maple syrup on one of them or two of them, but you can spread it out. So you don't have to put jam on toast. I love toast. Yeah, I'd like to have a piece of toast in the morning, but I don't put jam on it. I'll put yogurt or cheese or avocado or something like that. So there's lots of ways, and we talk about them in Sugarproof, that you can make simple, quick fixes.
And what I like too is your message is not completely cut sugar out of your diet. Your message is to be aware of the different sugars that you're putting in your body to understand what is in the food that you're eating. So you're not putting a message out there completely cut out sugar 100%.
No. Absolutely. Because, if I showed up and told my family there's no more sugars, there would be a rebellion. Plus, we're not promoting ketogenic diet. The ketogenic diet is for, specialized situations. And, let's face it, here's a good analogy, right? We know too much sun exposure causes skin cancer, right? Everybody knows that. That doesn't mean to say we can't go outside and enjoy a day at the beach, right? We protect kids. We put sunscreen on them. We give them a hat, whatever it takes to protect our kids, right? So when we bring a baby home from the hospital, we baby-proof our house. So that's where Sugarproof comes from. It's the same analogy where sugar-proofing is about protecting your kids so that we are protecting them from the sugar that's infiltrated our food supply. I don't have any control over food companies. I wish I did, but I don't.
Hopefully not. Yeah.
We are parents, so we do have control over what we buy and how we prepare food. And we don't have to cut out sugar. We just have to be more aware of where it's coming from and how it's affecting so that we can right size it and minimize it as best we can as parents to make food healthy.
I think that's such a really important point. Something else that really stuck out to me in your book is the phrase, "This is your child on sugar." So it reminds me back, I think it was probably like in the 80s or something. I know I was a young kid and there were those commercials, "This is your brain on drugs." And it kind of brought me back to those days. But as I was reading, so obviously from our standpoint at NASH Knowledge, we're really, focused on fatty liver disease and the impact that, sugar consumption has on the liver. And a broadened focus for us is around family health. But in reading your book, so I mentioned my son and he has high triglycerides and a bit of a sugar addiction, and he's very hyperactive. He's had some, emotional challenges and things of that nature. And in reading your book, it really was eye-opening to me as well, the impact that sugar in his diet is actually having on his behavior as well. So can you maybe even talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Detecting pre-diabetes, first of all, is not that straightforward. I'm assuming they did a fasting glucose level. I don't know if they did a hemoglobin A1C. There's different ways to do that. And really, those clinical thresholds are there to make clinical definitions, but really it's all about trying to maintain blood glucose levels as best you can. And the best way to do that is to cut down on sugar. And so this whole issue of whether high sugar diets cause hyperactivity has been the question of a lot of debate. About 20 or 30 years ago, research actually tried to say that it was a myth that sugar causes hyperactivity. They did some research and showed that sugar didn't have any differential effects on activity levels in children. But if you ask any parent about whether sugar causes hyperactivity, they'll say, yes, of course it does. That it causes rapid spikes in energies followed by rapid crashes where your kid's 1 minute bouncing off the wall and the next minute rolling around on the floor crying. That's real. I haven't met a parent yet who hasn't experienced that. The reason the research tried to say that wasn't true was because they did studies that compared sugar versus alternative sweeteners. So it wasn't a good control. They controlled for calories, but not for sweetness. And other studies since then from our group and others have shown that there is connected rises and falls of energy levels. And it's all to do with how well you can control blood glucose levels. So we can't measure that. You can't give your kid breakfast and then measure their glucose for the next 3 hours. But you can watch what they're doing. And by watching them, you can see. So we've had families that we followed where kids were on high sugar and they were falling asleep in the classroom. But when they went on our Sugarproof No Added Sugar Challenge, just for 7 days to see your kid without sugar and how they would be, but that phrase came from a parent who literally said they barely recognized their kid without sugar because they were much more even-keeled and much more even-tempered and able to concentrate and focus. And so, you can have control over that, not by taking sugar out all the way, but just by tweaking the diet to make sure there's not as big of a glycemic response.
So can you talk a little bit about this 7-day sugar challenge? Maybe even, I don't know if you have any anecdotal feedback, you just shared one story, but maybe just tell us a little bit about what this challenge is and the benefits of it, which I think you kind of already hit on, but maybe just specifically talk about the challenge here.
When we wrote the book, we wanted to have practical tools that families could use. And this is all based on research. And we wanted a short-term solution that would just kind of reboot things. And actually, the research shows that even after 7 days of no sugar, you can actually have improvements, even in liver fat, actually. So fatty liver is very responsive to sugar reduction. You can have improvements in cardiovascular risk factors, in blood pressure, and so on. But also, from a behavioral standpoint, the idea is to reset taste preferences. And the problem is, because we're conditioned to all this sugar and all this sweetness, the more we're consuming it, the more we crave it. It's addictive. Sugar and sweetness is addictive. And the more addicted you get, the greater amount of craving that you get for more and more sweetness. How do you stop that? How do you stop an addiction? You can either dampen it down slowly, which is our 28-day challenge, or if you think you can go cold turkey, and many families are able to do this, just say, okay, I'm going to go for 7 days with no added sugar. I'm going to go through my pantry, find all the hidden sugars, put them to the back of my pantry or donate them to the food bank or whatever. I'm going to not buy soda or juice. I'm going to follow the Sugarproof meal plan, and there'll be no added sugars. And we're just talking about added sugars. Fruit's okay. Natural sugar and dairy products is fine. Okay. And then we did this in about 30 or 40 families to gather data for the book, and it was so well received. And we had so many stories from families. Oh, my daughter's no longer falling asleep in class. My son, I hardly recognize him. He's much more even keeled. My daughter's skin is looking much better. So, we got such great feedback that we decided to put it in the book as a program. And it's not for all families, but many, many families are able to do it. Some families will say, oh, my husband's not going to go for it, or my teenage kids are not going to go for it, in which case we have other strategies that we can talk about. But for many families, the 7-day challenge works well. And that's, after the 7 days, literally the taste buds reawaken. Sweetness is so powerful that it overwhelms all the other taste buds in the mouth. So that once you take that out, we've also had families who suddenly said, oh, my kids suddenly appreciate vegetables, or they're more likely to try vegetables because they can actually taste it, and they're no longer conditioned to crave this sweetness. That's all they want. Sweet, 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 sweet. So we have to like reboot that. It's like rebooting your computer because it's got overwhelmed with all the data circling around it. It's like, okay, time to reboot the computer, time to reboot the modem because it's not working. And then after that reboot, things are calmed down again.
I think that makes so much sense. And when you think about just addiction in general, like you said, any addiction, that makes a lot of sense. And I think a scary thing that I think about too is the food industry has really been deceptive in their marketing tactics. And I know you talk about this a little bit in your book as well, about just kind of the way that sugary foods are marketed, and how we are deceived by the food industry, and how that's changed over time. I've heard a lot of people even compare tobacco companies own or have a stake in food companies, and they're using some of those similar tactics that they use to get folks addicted to nicotine. So can you maybe talk about that a little bit as well?
Absolutely. I mean, there's no question. Food companies are hijacking our kids' taste buds. We're born with a built-in preference for sweetness. So that's supposed to be there for protection. It's supposed to favor breast milk, which is sweet. It's supposed to favor seeking out of healthy calories. Back when we were, from an evolutionary perspective, that made sense. But now seeking out calories looks very different, right? We're at the grocery store where, like I said, 70% of things that kids are grabbing for have added sugar. So this mechanism is no longer useful. In fact, it's working against us because food companies are developing products trying to reach the bliss point, and they reach the bliss point by making things sweeter so that more people will like them, including kids. So that's why kids' products are highly sweetened. And then, they'll use tactics on marketing and food labeling. Like you say, food companies are using the same marketing tactics that tobacco used by using fancy characters, bright colors, television advertising during peak time, and so on and so forth. So they're pushing things because they want kids to get hooked on their products. The way they hook them is with sweetness and fun characters that they grab onto.
And another startling fact to me was finding out that a lot of studies that have been done were actually funded by the sugar industry as well. And that's something that I've heard bits and pieces of that, but learned about in your book. And that to me is just startling.
Yeah, I mean it's a long, complicated history of involvement of different industries, and the sugar industry who did research in the 70s and 80s and found connection between high sugar and disease risk, and then kind of hid them. Back then there was a big promotion of low fat foods, and low fat foods meant taking out the fat, which meant adding in the sugar in processed foods to disguise the taste or make fat-free food more tasty. And the sugar industry had evidence back then of some of these effects, but hid it because sugar was so important for processed foods that they didn't want that message to get out there.
Yeah, no, that's scary. But I think, the maybe the silver lining is that we have folks like you and others, medical experts who have been doing a lot of research and really following the data and awakening us parents and families and, the public as a whole, and helping to better educate us, because you can't make changes if you don't have that education, if you don't have that knowledge. That's kind of the first step, right? Is kind of that awareness and that education.
Yeah. And that's my primary goal. I get a lot of pushback from people. Oh, you're telling me to do this. You're telling me to do that. I don't want to eat eggs. I don't want to eat that. And, I don't have any specific agenda in terms of what particular diet you should follow. If you don't want to eat eggs, that's fine. If you're vegan, that's fine. If you're formula feeding, that's fine. Whatever it is. But my primary goal is information and knowledge sharing, because information and knowledge is power. And that doesn't mean to say you have to make all the necessary changes, but I think having that information, having that knowledge will help nudge you in the direction of beneficial outcomes. So again, I don't think current diet trends are that helpful. Diet trends come and go. It's very confusing. This is healthy. That's not healthy. I know it's confusing because studies change, but for me, what's pretty clear, unified finding across any diet that you're on, whatever you're eating, the more sugar that's in there, the more harmful it could be. So whatever it is, reducing the sugar will be helpful, right? So that's our message. And you can apply that across any dietary program that you're following. But it's all about knowledge and information and translating it. When we wrote the book, my editor kept telling me news that you can use, because for 30 years I've been writing technical papers and grants, and at this stage of my career I want to translate all that to make it useful. And my editor's like, okay, you've told us about this complicated story, but what does it actually mean for Gina, who's a parent of a possible pre-diabetic child? So we wanted to make it not just information, but translate that information to practical use.
No, I think that's great. That's, for me as a parent, it is news that I can use, because there is so much clutter out there, and it is so hard and difficult to really understand what is what. To your point, you hear about all these different trend diets and fad diets. And, 1 week you hear this is good for you, this is not good for you. And then it changes the next week. And it's just hard to stay on top of it. And I think the research you've done is so critical. And to your point, translating it and giving us news that we can use so that we can make, as parents, those informed decisions. And that's part of it, NASH knowledge, why we've decided to really put a high priority on family health and tapping into experts such as yourself to give us that information and that knowledge, because 10% of kids today have fatty liver disease. And that's continuing to rise. And I'm not a medical expert. I don't dig into the research and data to the degree that you do. But there's definitely a correlation there between the increased consumption of processed foods, sugar, fructose. You hit on drinks earlier and, liquid, consuming sugar through liquid. You think about like the increase of sports drinks and sodas and juices that kids drink, where they should be drinking more water. And that's why we really, are focused on family health, because we realize that, those choices start in the family, right? If your parents aren't eating healthy, how are you going to get a kid to eat healthy? So it has to, the parents really have to do the right thing and have that education so that they can educate their kids just like anything else. I think you gave some really great analogies and examples.
I can only agree, obviously. And I think family is a powerful influence, especially for younger kids. It gets a little trickier as kids get older from personal experience, but now is the time. And actually can start even before birth as well. So there's a lot of intergenerational transmission and early developmental factors going on too. So I think it's never too early to begin that process.
That's a really great point as well. That's something that came up in a discussion we had in our organization, NASH Knowledge, recently about working with OBGYN offices and doctors and starting, once women get pregnant and starting to really make sure that they're understanding, the food that they're putting in their body and how that affects their baby even before a child is born. So I'm glad that you hit on that as well. One of the things I love about I love your entire book. But one of the many, many things that I love about your book is about really getting your kids excited about cooking. And I mentioned that, my family, we cook together. So my dad actually had fatty liver disease. And that's why we founded our organization. So I'm seeing it on both ends, from my father and now my son, who is definitely at risk for, I mentioned pre-diabetes and diabetes and, fatty liver disease. So we got together and cooked as a family. And I love the recipes in your book. I personally am not one who loves to cook that much. I do not like being in the kitchen, but even I really enjoyed it. It was a great time to kind of bring the family back together. And one of the things that I think is such a, it's a great time right now, because we all experienced such hardships over the past year plus because of COVID. And we missed that family time. And I think getting together and cooking in the kitchen and getting the family excited about cooking together again and getting healthy again, I think is such a critical thing. And I think it's such a great opportunity. Health really became front and center with COVID, but at the same time, I think many of us lost our health also because we were sitting at home, we were vegging out on the couch, we were snacking more. So I don't know if you have any comments about, what made you decide to put recipes in your book, and talk maybe even a little bit about getting your kids excited about cooking.
Yeah, thank you so much, Gina. That's really great. I love to hear that we're making an impact. So my co-author, Emily Ventura, was a former graduate student that worked with me many years ago, but we've always stayed in touch. She also trained with Alice Waters in the Edible Schoolyard and develops recipes. So, just in putting all this together in terms of coming up with practical solutions, we felt we had to get kids involved and we had to have recipes in there. I love to cook. I love being in the kitchen. We as a family enjoy that time and have always ate together for the evening meal and involved the family, not just in cooking, but in deciding what to eat. And so has Emily and her family, and she's a single mom now, and it's harder for her, but she's still very passionate about it. And we know from the research that involving kids, not just in cooking, but in eating together, just the very act of coming together as a family and eating is beneficial. So in terms of the recipes, we challenged ourselves to see if we can come up with great recipes without any added sugars. That's not to say that we advocate that you can never use added sugar if you want to make a cake or make some cookies. My kids love to bake, and there's always something delicious hanging around, and that's fine. But we also said, well, can we mix it up? If you're going to make cookies, or can we have a cookie that doesn't have any added sugar, so you can at least mix it up? Or if we're going to give our kid a blueberry muffin or a granola bar, can we make one with 0 added sugars? And that was our challenge. And so the 39 recipes in the book, and many, many more on our website, sugarproofkids.com, have kind of followed that. And we also wanted to make them easy and versatile, because we know families are busy We want the kids to get involved, so they have to be fairly simple and not complex. And they have to be versatile, because I don't know about your family, but my family, everybody's got a different preference. I have one daughter who's a vegetarian, one who doesn't like bananas, one who doesn't like avocados, one who doesn't, it's like always something going on, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so that's what kind of bothered me about diet books, that like they presuppose that everybody's suddenly going to like join the train and be on board with this one plan. It's just, it doesn't work for families. So we wanted them to be versatile, so that you can use this recipe for a blueberry muffin, but you can, if you're vegan, you can modify it. If you don't like bananas, you can modify it. If you don't like gluten, you can, if you want to use gluten-free flour, you can modify it. So versatility was key. Simple was key, because we wanted minimal cleanup, maximal opportunities for kids to be involved, and we wanted to challenge ourselves to make fun foods for kids without added sugars. And I think we pulled that off.
I love that it was simple and easy, like I said, for me, but it also got me really to enjoy cooking, which is something I've never, even though I have an Italian father and an Irish mother. So I never really caught that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Somehow
yeah, it's surprising two cultures that love to cook.
Yeah. Somehow I missed that one. But my kids enjoy cooking. But because I don't enjoy cooking, we've never really like cooked together. So your book's kind of given us, kind of that inspiration to do that. And as I mentioned, my son, he loves to cook, especially, and it's helped them, which a point you made earlier, really develop a better taste for good natural foods instead of just the sugar, which is great.
Yeah, and that involvement can start small, and obviously it's age dependent, but it can start small, whether that's washing the vegetables or trimming them, or even growing a little herb garden. Doesn't have to be fancy, just a little something so that they can appreciate that. And as they get older and more interested, they can take on more. And we've had some great stories, including a new one from your son, who've just kind of caught the bug. Because if you think about it, kids love to make mixtures, right? And they love to concoct. Yes. And so that's what it is. And that's another one of our strategies of just getting kids involved. It doesn't even have to be cooking. It could be, I'll take breakfast cereal as an example, because we get this question a lot. What's the best breakfast cereal? You can buy a very simple breakfast cereal, and just studies show that kids will like a simple flakes or a simple O's or whatever, if they have the opportunity to kind of make their own little concoction. So you can add berries to it, add some nuts to it, throw a bit of yogurt on there. Let kids have at it, and they will actually come up with a very nutrient-dense, delicious breakfast cereal that will be much better than even the fanciest healthy cereal. Because the fancier you get, the more stuff they add. You don't know what it is, and it gets expensive too. So it's just another example of, it doesn't have to be cooking. It could be just making mixtures that they'll then eat.
Right. That's a great point. The kids are helping out with the cooking too. That takes a little bit of the load off the parents as well, because we're all doing it together. So I like that aspect. I'm a single mother also, so I like that aspect.
Oh, you should talk to Emily. So, we've heard some feedback that it's a little bit of pushback. Oh, it causes more trouble. There's more cleanup involved and so on. So I think there's this perception. I don't think it's true, but it's a perception that it will end up being more work to get your kids involved. But I don't think so, because you can kill two birds with one stone. It's quality time. You get to hang out with your kid in the kitchen.
Yeah, no, that's what I loved about it, because usually I'm trying to figure out what our meal is, and the kids are, sitting over watching TV, and instead we're spending time together as well, which was such a beauty of cooking healthy together also. I don't know if there's anything else in particular that you wanted to make sure that we hit on today. Anything that I may have missed, some key points.
One thing is sweeteners. We hear a lot of questions about what type of sugars are natural sweeteners okay. So those are kind of two different questions. So like in terms of the baking at home, in Sugarproof, we know don't use added sugars, just as a challenge to ourselves. But that doesn't, at home, I would go for a less processed sugar like coconut sugar or maple syrup or raw honey. And you can mix up sugars as well. So you don't have to use all coconut sugar. And generally, you can just cut the sugar. I mean, that's the simplest thing you can do. If you're making brownies or cookies or a cake, I can guarantee those brownies will be just as good if you cut out 30% of sugar. You can probably go to 50%. You might want to do that in a stepwise fashion. But if you do that, you can enjoy your cookie and not have to worry about all the sugar because there's 30% less in there. I don't advocate sweeteners like stevia or monk fruit. I'd much rather you just made with less sugar. Why is that? Well, number one, I don't think they taste very good. That's just my personal preference. Some people don't mind the taste. And I think it's better to appreciate the taste of actual food. I think they all have some kind of fake taste, even if they're natural, like stevia or monk fruit. We don't eat monk fruit or eat stevia. It's still a kind of a not natural taste. The bigger issue is they end up not solving this problem of craving sweetness. And research actually shows that habitual consumers of sweeteners end up, even children or adults, end up eating more calories and more sugar because number one, you feel like you have a license to eat more. So if I give you a bag of sugar-free cookies, maybe you'll have 2 or 3 because, they're sugar-free. I might as well eat, right? I would much rather just eat one quality cookie that tasted good. That's my preference. So I have a friend who calls that quality junk, which is kind of cute. But so it all comes back to taste and quality and moving away from processed food. If you move away from processed food, you're again going to be consuming less sugar and getting better nutrient density from the food.
Oh, great. Thank you. I appreciate that. I have a friend who did move to like artificial sweeteners and thinking that he was doing the right thing and realized that it actually had a big detriment on his health. So I think there's a really good point that you mentioned.
They are very problematic. And most of these sweeteners are not absorbed. The reason that they can provide sweetness without the calories is because they're not absorbed. The only way you can get calories out of food is if it's absorbed. If it's not absorbed, where does it go? It goes to your gut, and it can affect your gut health, can cause bloating, affect your gut microbiome. We have these sweet taste receptors, not just in the mouth, they're all the way through the body. So, again, it's a compound that you ingest that has effects on the body. So we have to think holistically.
Anything else before I ask you to let us know where we can find your book and more information? I'd like you to plug your website again as well. I know you mentioned it, but not if you have any last final remarks.
No, we'd love to hear from you. So our website is sugarproofkids.com. You can sign up on there for our newsletter. We send out weekly new recipes that you'll only get on the newsletter. You can follow us on social media. On Instagram, it's Sugarproof Kids. And then you can get the book wherever you find books these days, whether that's in an actual bookstore or online. All the big usual outlets have it, and in different forms. So it's also available on Kindle and audiobook, and it's available in Spanish as well, which we didn't mention, by the way. That's another point. Fatty liver is a big problem among the Hispanic population. I don't know if you have this Hispanic heritage, which may be contributing in your family, but there's a much higher vulnerability to fatty liver among the Hispanic population.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. We've actually translated all of our materials. We have a lot of materials out there, infographics. We created animated short videos about liver health and the liver and sugar. And we're getting the animated videos will eventually be translated into Spanish, but we do have all of our other materials in the Spanish language just because of the higher prevalence within the Hispanic population. So I'm really glad that you brought that up as well.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's really helpful. Yeah, so we'd love to see you. Join us on Sugarproof Kids. Love it if you could get the book. Sometimes we have guided challenges. You'll hear about those on social media. Let's work together and try and get Sugarproof out there in front of families as much as we can.
No, for sure. It's all in, the goodness of helping our future generation and helping, our kids be healthier and get healthier families. So, and my dad actually purchased my copy of my book for me, but I was pleased to see, I was in Barnes & Noble recently and under the family health section, It was right out there front and center. And I was really excited to see it. And I actually was buying a copy for a friend. So I bought her a copy there when I saw it. Just
great.
my face there. So I thought that was really great.
That's good to hear, because obviously our book was launched in September and we've been operating almost virtually since then. So it's nice to hear that you saw it in a bookstore. And my dream is to walk into a bookstore and see a pile of Sugarproof as you walk in. So the more people that hear about it, the more demand there'll be. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Anytime I see it in a bookstore from now on, I'll take a picture and email it to you so you can
Please do. Please do. Yeah.
I will. Well, thank you. I honestly cannot thank you enough. This is a really special episode having you on for International NASH Day as well. So thank you again. And for all of you listening, hope you enjoyed this. Hope you got some great education and knowledge today. This is our Love Your Liver podcast, where we remind you to just give your livers just a little bit of extra love today. So thank you very much. And we hope you all have a great rest of your day.